I'm Emma Stibbon. I'm an artist working primarily in drawing and printmaking. My interest is rooted in landscape, and for a long time now it's been looking at remote locations, usually undergoing some sort of change or transformation. I've been working in particular in places that are at the extremes of the planet, in the polar regions, and I want to record the incredible beauty and wonder of these extreme environments, but of course that's now underscored by our knowledge and awareness of their instability due to the rapidly warming environment.
We're seeing sea level rise around the world because of climate change, and there's two kind of key effects. One, when the world warms, water expands, and so you kind of get this thermal expansion effect. But the other one is the melting of land-based ice. And the major source of ice is Greenland. The Greenland ice sheet's equivalent to about 7 meters of sea level rise if it all melted. And Antarctica, which is equivalent to about 70 meters of sea level rise if it all melted. Any loss of the polar ice sheets actually causes a global rise in sea level.
I've been wanting to connect these seemingly remote big events with the more local change that we can see here in the UK. When Burton invited me to make this exhibition, the two things really seemed to come together.
Burton at Bideford is situated in the heart of the biosphere here in North Devon, a UNESCO heritage site which is recognised for its scientific importance. Receding coastal erosion is happening right before our eyes, and this is obviously being backed up by scientific data and new research which is happening at this moment in time. I've been aware of Emma's work for the last 10 years, and it seemed natural that we should invite her to do some work alongside our permanent collection. One of the things which I thought Emma would be interested in is the range of pigments which can be found along the North Devon coast. One in especially is a pigment called Bideford Black, and it was just near the area where the research was actually done, looking at coastal erosion.
This coastline of Bideford Bay in North Devon has a really special geology. Big dramatic folds of vertical strata and a real variety in colour of rock, which is quite distinct. You can really see how the land has been pushed up by the thrust of the tectonic plates over many thousands of years.
If you look along the cliffs here, that's all formed from coastal erosion and sea level rise and sea level change. But what's concerning us at the moment is the rate of pace of change. With climate change, waves are getting bigger and stronger because there's more energy that's going into the ocean. That's driving the bigger winds, and that again makes bigger waves. In one of the most recent storms, we have a wave buoy out there, and that stopped registering the waves at 8 meters. We know they've got much higher than that. So we have some very big waves that hit this coast, and that's what really causes the erosion going on. So behind me here, we can see some of the cliffs next to Westward Ho that are in that process of eroding away. The fact that you've got exposed soils there, no vegetation on, means that there has been a recent fall and it's very much undercut there, so it's going to go again.
In preparing for this exhibition, I wanted to depict a physical sense of local place, and some of the observations that I've made whilst I've been out walking and drawing in Bideford Bay, many cliff falls and landslides, the kind of rock formations. And of course these coastline features are important indicators of what's happening. I want to give a sense of how this very local landscape to Burton is connected to the seemingly remote events of ice melt happening in the polar regions due to sea level rise and of course climate warming.
So coastal erosion is one of the greatest financial risks to society of any natural hazard. Our research showed that rock coasts, which make up over half of the world's coastlines, could retreat more rapidly in the future due to accelerating sea level rise, including here in the UK. Our studies found that rock coasts, including North Devon, are likely to retreat at a rate not seen for 3,000 to 5,000 years. This was surprising because rock coasts are traditionally thought of as stable compared to sandy coasts and soft cliffs. Specifically, we found that the rate of coastal erosion at Bideford has closely matched the rate of sea level rise for the past 8,000 years, which we think is a clear evidence of a causal relationship between cliff retreat and sea level rise. This allowed us to make future forecasts of cliff retreat and showed that rock coasts like Bideford are more sensitive to sea level rise than previously thought.
When I'm drawing in the field, I usually use wet media, watercolour, ink, something I can cover the page quite quickly. And these drawings that I make from observation in the field are important when I get back to the studio as a kind of memory aid. I find that I've got enormous recall when I look back at my sketchbook drawings. Perhaps something that doesn't happen so much when I look at the digital photos that I take as well. There's something about drawing from observation in the field that captures that experience. It's a challenge often with the weather, with the wind, or maybe even the ice, or even the bears in Svalbard. And that sort of challenge often comes out. It's like an alchemy on the page later when you review the drawing and realise that some of the memory of that experience is there in the drawing. For this project, I undertook 2 periods of fieldwork, one in the high Arctic. I travelled on a wooden barkentine ship with some other artists and writers from northern Norway up to Svalbard with the Arctic Circle, and the other period of research I went down to Antarctica and went to the Weddell Sea to see the sea ice and tabular bergs. I want to portray the beauty and drama of these extraordinary parts of our planet, but also I realise that these are also changing beyond recognition, probably within our lifetimes. You know, Svalbard is at the forefront of climate change. It's one of the fastest warming places on the planet. We're witnessing this dramatic retreat in polar ice shelves and glaciers, and this is obviously having a profound effect on our global environment. We had to sail up from northern Norway across the Barents Sea, which was pretty rough. And during the voyage, one of the things to distract myself from seasickness was to sit up on deck drawing. And I literally just made a drawing every few hours of the sea. And the voyage itself tracked north, vertically north. And it was only reviewing the drawings that I realised as it progressed up to the Arctic Circle, it was starting to freeze the media, and you can see that clearly in the sequence of drawings where the ice formation actually in the Indian ink is actually controlling the way the drawing is developed, which I found quite interesting, particularly as a sequence. I was also sitting up on the bridge helping the crew with logging our latitude and sea temperature, and it was quite kind of nice to look back at the logbook and then see the sequence of what's happened here in the drawings actually tallies with the latitude of the book.
I love the directness and simplicity of drawing, the thought you can pick up something from the ground to draw with or extract material elements from the landscape to make marks with. I really enjoy that physical, visceral sense of landscape. When I'm out exploring in the cliffs of Bideford Bay, it seemed obvious to work with the various recently exposed pigments that are really abundant in the cliff falls along the beach. There's an amazing range of rock types and colours and textures. And the landscape here is formed by sedimentary rock. The beds have been laid down over many thousands of years. So over time, there's this kind of fantastic range of sandstone, clay, shales, or limestone. They give a surprisingly wide palette of colours that I could work with. And it seemed really appropriate to introduce these pigments into my work. I love the idea that I could actually represent the landscape with itself. I enjoy this materiality in drawing, the unexpected ways in which media and subject come together. And these newly exposed pigments, which have been revealed through rock falls and slides, they really seem to want to get themselves into the drawing. One mineral in particular that's got a long history for use as a pigment is Bideford Black. It's an anthracite mineral, and you can see the seam of pigment running through the cliff. It's got a sort of shiny clay-like quality that seems to get onto everything. Back in my studio, I worked with the pigments that I'd ground up from the rockfalls along Bideford Bay, including Bideford Black. Working on such a large scale, I decided I wanted to use traditional scene painters' methods, so I used a spray application masking out my highlights of my paper. And I worked into this with my homemade paints, building up the wall drawing across the 5-metre span of paper. Working on such a large scale, I really want to try and immerse the viewer in the drawing and to give a sense of vulnerability. I'm interested in trying to give a physical sense of that immensity of the towering cliffs above you, with the drawing projecting out of the wall and the rocks spilling into the gallery floor, to give the viewer that physical sense of entering into the work. Historically, depictions of the sublime often took place with the viewer situated in a position of safety, kind of looking on with dread at some overwhelming view. But I think now in the 21st century, we're no longer looking at landscape through that safe frame of view. And I think, if I can try and imply the viewer into that actual picture space to give them a sense of immersion, because of course we're now in a situation of anxiety about environment, we're uncertain about where our place is within that.
Looking at Emma's work, I mean, it is really awe-inspiring. It is incredibly beautiful, but it also makes me a little bit afraid as well, because it just reminds me about what human beings can do to the landscape. On the one hand, you might think that, compared to these enormous areas of polar regions that Emma captures, you might think, what on earth could, tiny human beings do to affect that? And yet we know that we're changing the climate, which we know will lead to more of the ice melting. As we know already, climate change is leading to more cliff falls and the changing coastline here. So there is that real combination of both awe, but I have to admit a certain amount of fear as well.
I wanted to make a group of drawings that would suggest the energy and erosive power of the sea. For my large drawing of the sea breaker, I used seawater to dilute my ink and added sea salt to the darker washes. I was kind of interested that the ink dispersed in a particular way. When you look closely at the drawing, you can see that it's kind of got a strange grainy quality, which is due to the salt solution. Ocean currents are changing due to the warming seas. Places in South America are actually seeing some of the greatest impacts from Arctic ice losses. That's really difficult to hold in your mind. The fact that we're joined by the oceans, our future is bound together.
Anything we can do to slow the breakdown of both Greenland is quite significant, but particularly Antarctica, because the dramatic changes will come from Antarctica if they come from anywhere. Then we need to take that on board. And basically, that's really slowing emissions and slowing temperature rise. That is the most effective way of really locking up ice in Antarctica for as long as possible.
One of the mechanisms we have to keep an eye on things is we have a shoreline management plan. Here in North Devon, we helped write the first shoreline plan in about 1999. Since then, we put our expertise in working with the Environment Agency, universities and the local authorities to make sure that we've got the best information that says what's happening along the coast.
I'm interested in how drawing can communicate about an experience of being in a place. I really think it can connect us to our local environment or kind of tie us into a place.
Being in an area of natural beauty and a World Heritage Site, this exhibition really highlights the importance of a changing landscape. From my point of view, this exhibition represents the magical qualities which the Devon landscape has, a source of inspiration which never ceases to amaze me and constantly changes on a day-to-day basis.
I'm increasingly conscious that we're living through unprecedented times now. I feel a sense of urgency as an artist to record through my drawing what I'm witnessing in my lifetime of the impact of climate change on landscape.
I think art can engage people on an emotional level and move them in ways perhaps that very closely typed leaflets don't. You know, that there are ways in which art can really get under people's skin and affect their hearts. And I think what that can do, what I hope that can do, is mean that people will fall in love with nature again, and by doing that will become even more mobilised to do everything they can to protect it.